Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 39 of Nutanix Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got a rather robust group today, so we'll do some quick introductions. Harvey and Jaira are with me as usual. Harvey, how's it going?
All right, it's going fine. How are you?
I'm good. I appreciate you getting this group together. And Jaira is no longer in a basement.
Getting closer. T minus 3 weeks, and we'll be on a moving truck.
I think I had promised myself I'd stop asking you about your move, but I can't help myself. I see the boxes and I see different background this time than before. So
no, I'm happy to keep providing the internet with random updates.
I still don't believe it. He's just moving boxes around in and out of the picture.
He just wants to give the impression that he's taking some time to move.
That's right.
Well, let's see. We've got two special guests with us, Kevin Cook with an E, Cooke, Kevin, and Michael Yanoti. I do it right, Michael?
Yanoti. Close enough.
I got it wrong.
Totally fine.
I got it wrong.
That's fine.
So let's start with Michael since he's talking at the moment. Michael, what's your role at Nutanix?
So my role is a senior systems engineer in the Northeast area, covering New York and Connecticut.
Okay. And then Kevin, yourself?
I am a VDI or EUC portfolio overlay for Nutanix Frame for end user computing workloads, and I cover the Americas.
I don't know, Michael, how long have you been at Nutanix?
Just hit 2 years, so like 25 months to be exact.
Okay, so that's a pretty long time in the world of Nutanix, which is not a new company, but been around for a while now.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kevin, how long have you been there?
Actually, a year now. About exactly a year ago, I joined Nutanix, but been in the EUC game for quite some time.
So I got to dive into that one then, Kevin. What's your tell me about your EUC game then. What kind of game do you have?
So the majority of my time, I guess you'd say I was in the end user analytics space. I worked for a little company called Liquidware. And I was the worldwide product director for Stratosphere UX. So, really everything from sizing, right? The pre environment level set, right? Whether that's sizing an environment or determining use case, all the way through troubleshooting, analytics, forensics, really the whole gamut of end user analytics and how they can help to benefit, right? EUC workloads.
And so what was the compelling event that got you to come over to Nutanix and work on the Frame team?
It's a great question. I think twofold. I think modern EUC has evolved, right? And a modern DaaS or PaaS platform, depending on which bucket you want to put us in, is really an important consideration. I think platform is a part of that. Protocol is a part of it. But equally and probably more important, the culture here is just awesome. Just the people, the environment, the DNA, the philosophy, their maniacal focus on things like customer satisfaction and customer success. It's just off the charts. Yeah. For a large organization, it's just strange, right? Because you go to large organizations and you get a lot of, I don't care, not my problem.
Right.
That is not the DNA here.
Yeah, somebody posted some Nutanix numbers over the weekend, end of last week, and I saw them again on LinkedIn over the weekend, and they're startup type numbers. And by startup, I mean by the focus and what you guys like to talk about in terms of where your numbers are at and where they're going. And to me, I don't know that you ever have to get out of a startup mentality these days. There's always plenty of growth and opportunity to continue to evolve in ways that startups have historically evolved. And then your blue chippers have settled in and become boring, if you will.
Yeah, totally agree. And the company just does a really good job of keeping sort of that loose, informal atmosphere, but really finding, sort of like birds of a feather. We're just, everybody's just maniacally focused on making that customer happy and going above and beyond. And that's, for a 6,700 employee organization, it's just very rare in my experience.
Yeah. Now, okay, before we let you go, we got to tell people that we might get a visit from a cuckoo clock.
Yeah, so my
Nice.
dad used to work for Bayer for us in the United States. Bayer, aspirin, the aspirin people. But he used to work for Bayer and used to make fairly regular trips out to headquarters in Germany. And on one trip, made a quick stop off in the cuckoo clock region and brought me home a cuckoo clock, old school metal pine cones, the whole 9 yards. And so as a bit of a nerd myself, it is I'll say dynamic and ever-changing environment. It just consistently requires dialing in accuracy, right? Jira made a joke that, the NTP service is not very good on this device.
Wouldn't that be cool though if you could
That's like a
develop
joke that Gyro would make.
Yes.
But I mean, all of a sudden that sounds like a great product, right? You have a cuckoo clock that ties into an NTP server. And of course, I guess, Kevin, you must enjoy your slight tweaks every day and constantly chasing it.
Yeah, I was going to say every morning I wind up the pine codes to put some known weights on the pendulum, and I have to adjust it by fingernail width increments to try to dial it in. And you just never, by the time I get it right, the humidity changes, the temperature changes, and I'm doing it all over again.
Yeah, I grew up in a house full of grandfather clocks. When I say three, we had 3 of them, and they were never right. Like it was an everyday thing. You had to chase them, and it made me wonder whether it was somebody's pocket watch from back 100 years ago or a grandfather clock or whatever. There's no way the time was ever right.
I was going to say the only way to get them to sync up would be to break 2 of them.
Yeah, for sure. So Michael, a little more on your background. I'm sorry, you said you were on the engineer side of this?
Yeah, so pre-sales engineer, but prior to that, funny enough, I did a lot of integrations on the Citrix side, probably about 8 years. So EUC is definitely near and dear to my heart, which is what makes me really proud to work with Kevin on this. A lot of Citrix, worked for a lot of different partners. I'd rather not name names, but I knew of you guys. I've known Harvey now for quite some time. And kind of coming here was a 3-year process of learning about Nutanix and working with a customer, and then getting really bitten by the bug, so to speak, really seeing the solution build as it went from infrastructure to software upon software and different portfolio products, and then finally getting here and really building on the passion of really helping customers. So it gives me many tools in my tool bag rather than just 1 or 2. So yeah, it's been a great ride since I've been here.
So as you guys, let me share my screen and bring the blog up. There we go. So as you guys know, if you work in EUC, if you work in virtual delivery of Windows applications and desktops in the financial sector, at some point that Bloomberg keyboard thing shows up and you got to be able to solve for it. So I guess that's where this story begins, right? You guys ran into a situation where you needed Bloomberg to work and you evolved the product to make it work. Help me understand, set up the story for us.
So I guess I could start, and then I think Kevin will elaborate much better than I could. So FinServ customer, obviously using Bloomberg, and being that it was a requirement to have the multi-factor biometric authentication that's built into the keyboard, they're currently a Citrix customer. It's still are a Citrix customer, and we wanted to prove the solution out, right? So Kevin and I did some due diligence. I was able to get a Bloomberg keyboard, got a test account, got it all up and running on my home computer. Kevin and I did some Zoom calls to make sure that we kind of got the gist of how it's going to work and where it will and won't play nice in Frame or in VDI in general. Luckily, we both have had background with Citrix and EUC, so we've been kind of down this path before. And then I could hand it off to Kevin because we essentially just went from that first initial step of doing the test to make sure that I could get everything running on my computer, which it all worked perfectly, and then kind of segueing into building it out on Frame, where there's a lot of newer technologies that we've just built in there. And I think it would be best to segue that to Kevin to complete the answer.
Okay.
Yeah, no, from Michael's point of view, there was, I guess, a bit of a confluence of two things, right? A customer need at a specific point in time, but also from a frame development perspective, we had just released into tech preview, now early access, generic USB pass-through support in Frame. So, from an underpinnings, from an architectural perspective, that had been going on for quite some time. But at the time, specifically when Michael came to me and we discussed how best to give a sort of a Bloomberg multi-factor authentication experience to this customer, we were ready from a Frame perspective to be able to demo that based on some of those architectural changes that are in play.
And what were the architectural changes you can share that were the enabler for that?
Yeah, there's a couple. From the bottom up, it was really a wholesale shift in the way that we deliver the frame remoting protocol. The frame remoting protocol, always, right from its inception, even pre-acquisition back in 2012, the frame remoting protocol was based on H.264 with underlying transport of web sockets and TCP. What's most relevant here is the shift to leveraging still H.264, but now the transport is going to be WebRTC from our friends at Google, and shifting now from WebRTC to the transport of UDP. We don't need to get into the merits of TCP versus UDP, but the important consideration here is the real-time communication support, and amongst other things, one of the major things that's going to enable is Frame's ability to support generic USB pass-through.
Okay. And then always bring up latency when you talk about USB pass-through. In your testing, have you seen how much latency you can stand in this scenario for it to keep working fine?
Yeah, the short answer is it depends, right? Andy, if your question is in the context specifically of Bloomberg, we have not done that testing, right? Especially when we're talking about folks that want to make sure that the length of cable from their desk to the data center is the same length of cable from, the guy who sits in the last row to the right. We're not down to that level of sophistication here at this point from a testing standpoint. But I will say that, broadly, the shift from the prior WebSocket to the new WebRTC actually increased all of the attributes in a positive direction. So we see that the latency is far more tolerant, that the overall bandwidth utilization is almost half what it was before. And overall, we're now able to do things like Bloomberg keyboard support and fully encapsulated webcam support inside the Frame session, right? So no side loading, no offloading or split tunneling of webcam sessions. We can do them now natively in that session, fully encapsulated in that session.
Yeah. Jira, you want to chime in?
Yeah, or ask since EUC is not really my long running background, to ask a dumb question. It sounds like is the real enabler there the generic USB support, right? So now we don't have to have a opinionated list of these devices work. It's more like we can sort of almost pass the port through. Latency will of course affect outcomes.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. So previously, anything that could be deemed basic or advanced HID types of devices, so keyboard, mice, speakers, microphones, etc. Anything that would sort of map to a basic or advanced HID type of device, and I don't mean to double nest my acronyms there, would just kind of work with Frame. And with this new generic USB support, if we can't support it under basic or advanced HID, we then can essentially load a virtual USB driver on the host machine, and it just essentially passes it through. And the VM then says, oh, new Windows device, what's this? Do you need to install a driver? And we're essentially just passing all of that USB interrupt over the channelized remoting protocol.
That's very slick.
Very native, very seamless, and it allows us to deliver with Frame a very sort of low barrier of entry, what I'll say low touch, right, on the client side. As a modern provider of DaaS services, one of the things that we really wanted to do was, not overcomplicate the client side requirement, right, especially for environments that are looking to prioritize, BYO, choose your own CYO kinds of attributes with very little touch on that end node.
So, and I agree with Gyra's new discovery of how valuable it is to be able to pass through native USB so that whatever you plug in can now work. How about the ability to tell things that you don't want to pass through, not to pass through?
Yeah, great question, right? So this is early access. It's just outside of tech preview. So step one, get it to work broadly. And to your point, Gyra and Andy, it does open the floodgates, right? So certainly step two will be administratively lock down those floodgates where appropriate. The good news is, while recognizing the device on the end node is one part that happens at the end node and as part of what's orchestrated by the communication protocol itself, the other necessary component is making sure that those drivers are loaded in the workload VM, right? So in a non-persistent environment, presumably a user can't really access or have administrative control over that VM. So we do have some guardrails in place and air gapping characteristics in place natively, just by good administrative role-based access control. But for a persistent environment, presumably there'd really be nothing from stopping an end user from installing a driver there and supporting really any device at that point.
Yeah. Which in most environments, you're going to have a lot of non-persistent, but those corner cases where you need persistent and let them do their own thing is what rounds out the solution.
Yeah. And we can turn off the ability to map through the protocol, right? That's not to say that it's an all or nothing. So we certainly can disable the ability to do generic USB, but on a device by device, sort of laser precision that we couldn't do on day one.
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, I've got a question for you on topic, but slightly off topic. And that is, you've mentioned Frame as a PaaS, you've mentioned it as a DaaS. And how can you explain to our audience where Frame fits into either one of those statements?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it gets down to, at least from my perspective, a shared definition set, right? If you talk about VDI, predominantly people think about on-premises infrastructure and a broker stack that they manage. When you talk about DaaS, most people sort of stereotype and immediately think, well, these are cloud workloads. Well, what if it's both of those things, right? And so it's nuanced, but I think important. Our definition and Frame, right? And you don't have to take my word for it. Gartner has categories that align to what I'm about to share as well. But Frame disaggregates the control plane. So the difference between on-prem VDI, right, and cloud-based DaaS in this case is who makes the sausage, right? In the case of VDI, you have to make the sausage and own that entire stack before you can eat the sausage. With DaaS, you're paying somebody else to make the sausage for you and you just eat it, right? So Frame in that context is DaaS in so much as the control plane is a disaggregated cloud-based management infrastructure. But you can run on-premises VDI instances with our control plane, or you can run cloud-based VMs with our control plane. So we're truly a hybrid platform in so much as we support infrastructure wherever you want to run that infrastructure.
Right. Hey, Harvey, I'll give you a chance to chime in here if you have anything.
I mean, I think Kevin's covering it very, very well. I mean, for the most part, we've already kind of hit on the major points of this, right? We've got Bloomberg keyboard that's working through, but as you guys astutely pointed out, there's lots more functionality that's coming through this, not just the Bloomberg keyboard, but it is definitely a great use case and check the box for what they needed for their financial customer at the time.
Yeah, I'll take a moment to just kind of walk through what I think I heard between Michael and Kevin in terms of the testing methodology, which is get your stuff together, try it native, try it local, make sure it all works as expected, then stick it into a virtual world, enable USB raw pass through, and see if it then works again under the same testing scenarios. I know that sounds trivial, but you'd be shocked the number of people I've run in through the years that didn't take their native testing into the cloud and took the same methodologies. They just threw their hands up and said it didn't work or something.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there's multiple layers to that, right? I think Michael, kind of sold himself a bit short, right? Frame makes the administrative, functions pretty easy, but you still need to make sure that you can make that Bloomberg Anywhere application VDI aware, right? And when regardless of whether you're installing that in Citrix or Amazon workspaces, or whether you're installing it, in any VDI, if it's a non-persistent environment, then the application needs to happily coexist in a non-persistent environment. So certainly, image management is still an important gray matter centric skill set, right? We don't automate that. You still have to be pretty good at image management and installing the application. From a protocol perspective and passing through the USB, it was pretty straightforward. There wasn't a lot of rocket surgery there for us to get into.
Yeah,
Gyra's big on rocket surgery.
And Andy, to add to that, and I think I like to keep things really simple because, at least in this example, being that Kevin and I both had major EUC backgrounds, luckily, it was first off it was meeting a customer need, and then also realizing that we don't have a validated solution for a lot of different things, which is what Nutanix is now churning out a lot more than ever. But the funny thing is that, those 10 or 15 steps that I did locally, we did the exact same thing in Frame, and without really any tweaking, it literally just worked, right? So that's the true story that I like to tell, especially around Nutanix, because the product developers, every single member on the Frame team that was involved, engineers, right? We're nothing without our engineers from a support standpoint. They create the stuff. It makes us look like heroes. I mean, Kevin and I, we have our name on this blog, which is awesome. It's great visibility. It's great to show that we worked as a team to do this. But I mean, we're just cogs in a massive machine of phenomenal engineers and support staff. So I'm not a huge limelight guy. Kevin knows that. A lot of people who know me know that. I've thanked everyone who's been involved in this. And like I said, no real tweaking. We just kind of set it up and it literally just worked. And we tried to break it. We did other things to kind of see what was going on, just kind of reverse engineer. But in all honesty, right, great product, very simple to set up. And by far one of the better EUC solutions out there amongst the other two big names.
Yeah. Okay. The two demos that are listed here in the blog, one is accessing Bloomberg Anywhere with biometrics. That's one of the things you guys were trying to prove you could work through the USB pass-through. Any highlights on that one?
Yeah. So from a blog perspective, the first sort of demo one is the one where we're doing that virtualized USB, full generic USB pass-through. So what you're seeing is what we'll call proprietary Bloomberg keyboard, the hardware device that's mapping through to a VM and leveraging really the richness of that device, right? We recognized it, I believe, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was 3 or 4 different devices. So it's a keyboard, it was a biometric authentication device, it was speakers, right? We saw it as a hub and then multiple devices as it was passed through. So you see the full sort of walkthrough there in demo one that showcases how we map the device in and then natively pass through all those functions to the frame managed VM. For demo 2, this is really the use case where perhaps you're not on a PC, you're not on a place where we can virtualize that full generic USB pass-through, right? And so the Bloomberg device essentially fails to be recognized as a biometric device. And what you see there is the Bloomberg Anywhere software recognizes that the same hardware is no longer present and instead asks you to authenticate via their B unit, right, which is an external 2FA MFA device, which creates a code. And what I thought was really cool about this is sort of twofold. One, it's still using the same hardware. We're just not passing through all the intelligence. But I think what's really interesting here is, now we've got this external device. It's got this really cool, if you're not in the financial services world, you haven't seen this before. It's got this really cool sort of 2FA MFA device that flashes on the screen. It captures this sort of on-off light thing to generate a 6-digit code. And then you see Michael, I did the voice overlay, but you see Michael type in the 6-digit code as he sees on the screen. It's just a cool, I guess what I'll call fallback, right? From a workflow perspective to show that the native Bloomberg Anywhere software fully functioned, did exactly what it was supposed to do, but changed the workflow when the generic USB was no longer being mapped through because of the client support for it.
The cool thing to add to that too, with the demo number 2, as it shows on screen with my lovely hand modeling, it's a little bit thicker and a little bit smaller than a credit card, where it still has a thumb reader or fingerprint reader, but they primarily tell you just to use your thumb, because when you grab it, you hit the power button. You can see it in the video, and as Kevin mentioned, right, the VDI screen we're using Frame, it does like a Morse code. Literally, it's like a strobe, and then that on-off light switch, like that strobe that it does, throws a 6-digit pin out, and then you it was either 4 or 6 digits actually, but you key that in, and you now have access. So for people who don't have Bloomberg keyboards, for people who use Bloomberg Anywhere via Bloomberg's website, you have this little credit card device, and it still works. So to Kevin's point, if for some reason the USB pass-through fails, you still have a backup and a secondary MFA option, so that you're not locked out of your Bloomberg. I mean, you could always call in and they could grant you access too, but primarily, right, it's kind of whatchamacallit, like a secondary use case, so that if one were to fail, you're kind of helping yourself with another device that you could authenticate with.
RV Driver, any additional thoughts around the concept of this one particular use case showing off the ability to get the USB pass through?
I think at a high level, this again just shows Nutanix being flexible, just making sure that they're meeting their customer needs, that they're offering a product that's going to be something that'll be used and used well by a variety of different customers, not just one vertical. And I think that, one of the things that I'm always looking for is a company that is big enough to move, but still small enough to care about their customers. And I think that's what we see out about Nutanix.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Kevin. Where is Nutanix going with Frame? Are you just going to, over time, just keep adding functionality to it and attack the space the way you are here?
Yeah, that's a great question. Without getting into too much proprietary feature sets, certainly I think Harvey, kind of nailed it, right? I would say that we're focused on meeting customers where they want to be. Right. From an end user perspective, it's creating a seamless, experience that's commensurate with, these laptops and computer devices that we've, used for 20 plus years. But from an administrative perspective, certainly hybrid and multi-cloud is very clearly part of where Frame is going. as a disaggregated management control plane, being able to support business processing, outsource kinds of use cases. I have many customers who don't want to be building data centers all over the planet. They need to support users in Manila, in Japan, right, in South America. And Frame is extremely flexible in so much as you can leverage the power of public cloud, but the same singular pane of glass to manage those end user workloads, end user computing really hasn't changed in the last 25 years, right? We still want to put the workload VM as close as we can to the end user, while at the same time getting that workload VM close to those back-end resources, whether that's a database, a CRM, an ERP, a financial services app. That hasn't changed. But Frame's ability now to leverage public and hybrid cloud in a vendor agnostic, cloud agnostic way is where we're seeing a lot of investment and a lot of desire from customers today.
And I get that question from time to time. Can I use Frame and other, do I have to use it only with Nutanix, only with AHV? And the answer is no, right? Anywhere we can put the agent
absolutely.
on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, and we were just recently, we've just recently gone live in Azure, right? You can purchase the Frame management infrastructure right from Azure Marketplace. And I think that's a testament to the fact that we just simply don't care about the infrastructure. You asked me earlier why I, came to Nutanix. The other sort of nuanced answer is Nutanix is awesome at making that infrastructure invisible. While there are many who still think of Nutanix as a hardware company, the reality is I don't really consider us a hardware company. I think we've kind of moved away from that. We're more of a solutions company that is enabling and facilitating this sort of hybrid and multi-cloud next wave of need from a business perspective. And Frame is absolutely at the tip of the spear with regard to enabling that philosophy.
Yeah. And one of the recent announcements you guys had was your partnership with iGel, where you're building in the ability to access Frame through an iGel device. That's pretty good for us. We have a lot of customers that are moving in the iGel endpoint direction software.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always interesting to me how customers sort of land on, endpoint management, often as their primary decision for or critical success factor for some type of next generation, EUC, whether it's VDI or DaaS or what have you. But certainly, I would agree. Having support for iGel and a host of other, thin client providers is really important. We've got a very focused, concerted effort on supporting an ecosystem of thin client vendors, beyond the HTML5 stack. Right, that's it for Frame. We want a modern HTML5 stack. Period. Full stop.
Help me understand that. So the client is accessing over HTML. That's one of the cores of how Frame works, right? And how you guys built the platform?
Correct. As a modern sort of forward-looking platform, we wanted to build that, sort of zero touch, no plugins, no extensions, no application. And for most use cases, and when I say most use cases, right, think single monitor, task worker, knowledge worker. That's all we need is a single, a browser stack. We do recommend a modern HTML5 stack. Not all HTML5 stacks are created equal. So we do recommend one that's well-designed and well-maintained and has all of the necessary prerequisites, right? When I talk about the new remoting protocol leveraging WebRTC, that WebRTC component is part of the HTML5 stack. And so we do, as a prerequisite, I recommend personally something based on Chromium. But really from a bare bones minimum perspective, we've tried to develop the remoting protocol and the solution overall to not require anything, no touch, no nothing. If you've got a modern HTML5 browser, Frame is going to work for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's interesting how this type of solution brings that promise of 20 years ago that everything was going to be browser-based. It truly can be, because then you bring your x86 workloads into a browser-based access solution, and you truly have solved the gap for the apps that can't be or haven't been developed into HTTP based delivery at this point.
Exactly.
All right, Jaira, I know we kept you at bay, you being the end user compute expert. Your chance to chime in here.
It's all super exciting. I love getting the full suite, just able to solve customer problems, right? So that's honestly super exciting for me.
Giving customers an alternative, right? A cost-effective alternative that allows them to still accomplish many of their user use cases, scenarios. That's been a promise for a long time that has really happened over the last couple of years.
Totally.
Michael, one more chance to chime in here.
Yeah. Again, thank you guys for having us. Andy, I sent a message on the iGel announcement because we were waiting for that for a while too. So, yeah, I mean, that right there says it all. I've been a huge fan of iGel. I've implemented it in many places. It's a phenomenal end-to-end solution. It helps me sell a lot of frame deals. And even if it's not a frame deal, it could be Citrix or Vue. We all know it supports it, right? I try to be as holistic as possible. I'm not just a Nutanix, pre-sales engineer, so to speak, right? I try to provide a solution start to finish as holistic as possible. So to say this is what you could do with your endpoints, and then this is how you can access whatever EUC you're going to be using, it just goes with the whole model of giving the customer, what's best for them. So we may not sell every single thing in there, but they're going to remember that a Nutanix engineer, made other, observations or suggestions around whatever third-party tools or technology that's out there. I don't need to sell, all of us every single time, which certain people may not like to hear, but I'll tell you right now, it keeps customers coming back. And I'd rather take care of them now and have them for the long run than not take care of them and have them never come back. So again, thank you for the opportunity, guys.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining. And just further on this iGel announcement, right? You talk about being browser based. You take a browser, make it full screen, and it works well and quick and fast, and has features like USB pass-through enabled. You don't know that it's agentless at that point or clientless. I think that's revolutionary for some people when they discover that. Okay, Harvey, any additional comments?
No.
This is the quietest you've ever been.
I know.
Bring other people on to do the work, I
guess. That is a reflection on the job that Mike and Kevin did.
Good man. Good
we
man.
prepped for years for this. Years. Thanks, guys.
You're just along for the ride, Jaira. He could have been over there boxing stuff up this whole time.
Pretty much.
Lost packing time. The as a quick public service announcement, right? Just given what week it is, if you live under a rock, you should probably know to go check your full infrastructure for this Java logging vulnerability. If this is the first you're hearing about it, anything on your network with an IP address, you should go get a response from your vendor, Nutanix included. I won't mention ours because as soon as you hear this, it'll be out of date. Go get the latest info from every vendor. But folks that I trust that don't have a reason to amp this up say it's worse than Heartbleed. So go do your diligence on what you need to go patch.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's good public service announcement there.
Absolutely.
I thought you were going to go down the you could always take a test drive road.
I mean, people
Nutanix test drive.
What would a test drive be, Andy?
Well, it'd be the opportunity, which we have on the blog here, is you can always go whatever we talk about in the Nutanix world. There's always the opportunity to go do a test drive, which is modern day way of saying give it a spin. And it's, as I highlight all the time, I listen to these podcasts back myself. It's amazing that we live in a world where we can talk about it and go test it without spending hours and hours of configuration, which everybody on this call has gray hair, I think, to some degree. I don't know if Harvey has any gray hair, but spent tons of time building test systems. Now you just click a few buttons and it appears, which is nice.
Yep, nicely done.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining today, and we'll have you guys on. If you have another topic at some other point, we'll keep an eye out for it, but feel free to let us know and we'll have you back on.
Awesome.
Sounds good. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.